copy of a copy of a copy of a copy copy. Deja vu.
Deja Reviewed.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Deja Reviewed podcast, where we talk about the original versions of TV shows that were later rebooted. This is season 1, which we're calling In the Zone because we're discussing the Twilight Zone. I'm Michael.
And I'm Mark.
And today we're talking about season 1, episode 7, titled The Lonely. And episode 7 came out in 1959. It was directed by Jack Smite, written, of course, by Rod Serling, starring Rod Serling, Jack Warden, and John Denner.
There is a fifth dimension.
Both shadow and substance of things and
Suddenly up ahead,
just
a door.
You're moving into a land, another dimension.
Next stop, the Twilight Zone.
Okay, so the Rod Serling voiceover that opens this episode, which we are a huge fan of his voiceover writing, is witness, if you will, a dungeon made of mountains, salt flats, and sand that stretch to infinity. The dungeon has an inmate, James A. Corey, and this is his residence, a metal shack, an old touring car that squats in the sun and goes nowhere, for there is nowhere to go. For the record, let it be known that James A. Corey is a convicted criminal placed in solitary confinement. Confinement in this case stretches as far as the eye can see, because this particular dungeon is on an asteroid 9 million miles from the Earth. Now witness, if you will, a man's mind and body shriveling in the sun, a man dying of loneliness.
And the description from IMDb is a little bit comical, but it just is a convict living alone on an asteroid and living, but he's in prison, receives from the police a realistic woman/robot. Which I guess is accurate, right?
I guess so. So to just fill out the summary for those who didn't see it, yes, he's this convict who's been sentenced to solitary confinement on an asteroid. They regularly come to drop off supplies, and on one trip they drop off this humanoid female robot, and he initially is sort of repulsed by it, but then comes to learn to love the robot. And at the end, they come and he's been pardoned and is going to get to go home, but they don't have enough room on the ship for the robot, and he's upset because he's in love with the robot, so they shoot the robot and then he goes home. Is that a good summary?
It's a great summary. So right off the bat, Mark, I think that this was interesting that they imprisoned this guy 9 million miles from Earth just on an asteroid by himself. And it made more sense. I guess this shows you that maybe we shouldn't have privatized penal system in the United States, because it was apparently more cost effective to send this guy to a planet 9 million miles. Or an asteroid 9 million miles away than to just throw him in an 8x6 cell.
I didn't get, so I will say I'm curious. Before we started this, you said this was an episode you really wanted to discuss, and I'm curious because this episode for me was just so bizarre. I was not a huge fan of it, and that was from step one when they described that. I'm like, this is the most inefficient way to imprison people. Like, you want them in solitary, throw them in a lone cell, and it wasn't that they didn't even think about that. I don't think it was that it was more cost effective. From the dialogue when the supply ship is visiting, it's there twice, once early in the episode, once late, and then the first time it's basically expositions. There's it's Corey's kind of friend who's like the leader of the expedition who, Freudian slip there, it really is just all exposition in the first half of the episode. Who like apparently sometimes stays and plays chess with him, or so is the closest he has to a friend in his solitary confinement. And there's these two other guys who basically are like the hired help, and they're even talking about, the one guy's like yelling at Corey because we come back 4 times a year, which means 8 months out of 12 I'm away from Earth. My kids don't even recognize me. I'm like, this is the least efficient thing possible. And from what they talk about, the sort of policies back home, which eventually get changed, which is why he gets pardoned, I got the sense that it was this idea of like, no, just throwing somebody in a cell isn't enough. Like, we want the ultimate punishment. like you're completely away from everybody and Earth and everything. Like,
yes. And so, and I was like, I couldn't remember what after the first time I watched this episode, I'm like, what did he do that was so horrible? And he was convicted of murder that he claimed was self-defense. But how heinous could that murder have possibly been that they had to send this guy to this asteroid 9 million miles from Earth? They did drop in, Mark, I don't know if you caught this, at some point during the episode, or later on after they drop off, Alicia. So Allenby is the name of the guy, the main guy, the policeman apparently, who drops off supplies. I don't think we even got names of the other guys. And then Alicia.
One of them is Adams, is the one who hates him.
Oh, yeah. So they didn't really even matter. But and then Alicia is the name of the woman robot. So when he's kind of taken to Alicia, she's like, oh, look, a shooting star or something like that. And he's like, oh, no, that's a ship. And he does say, he's like, they're going to visit these other asteroids near us first. So, which makes me wonder, are there a bunch of criminals up there? And also,
yes.
If we're talking about...
Yes, there are.
Okay. So also, if we're talking about that is definitely not efficient if you're only going to put one guy. At least put all the criminals on the same one so they have each other. But like, now you have to find an asteroid for each one of these criminals that's 9 million miles from Earth.
And these asteroids have to be large enough to have their own gravity and atmosphere so he can breathe and everything. Like, it's
right.
Just, yeah, I just looked up because thinking of the cost factor, and they're doing 4 supply runs a year to each one. Today I just looked this up. It costs $10,000 to put 1 pound of payload into Earth orbit. That's not even getting it to asteroids millions of miles away. That's just getting it off the Earth.
Well, and as you said, so the reason they couldn't take Alicia is because they only had room for 15 pounds worth of stuff. And at first, Corey he's like, I don't even own 15 pounds of things. He's like, I just have the shirt and blah, blah, blah. Because he assumed that Alicia was just, because he basically started treating her as a human. And actually, when they drop her off, they specifically say, like, or the instructions specifically say, like, this is essentially a human. Like, she has human emotions. She has like all these human characteristics. So basically treat her like a human. So the fact that he, didn't see her as another passenger. Yeah, and they only had these 15 pounds to, I don't know what my point is actually, but my point is, I guess, that this is a very expensive, and they're sending 3 police.
I think your point was that he was not counting her as the 15 pounds because he's like, obviously they will take me and Alicia, the humans, right. And then the 15 pounds was for other stuff.
Right.
And that was one where as soon as he's, so this episode was just chock full of expository things that like are very specific solely for the reason of like putting arbitrary deadlines or restrictions on things to sort of make the plot run. You know, like the very first time they show up, they're like, we have to get back into orbit in 15 minutes. I'm like, this is a 2-month trip and it's your 15 minutes. They're like, well, we'll miss the guy says something about like the orbital angle, and it's clear even he doesn't know what he's saying or understand the dialogue. He's like, checks his script, orbital something or other.
Yeah, it was dumber than orbital angle, because I feel like orbital angle is something they talked about in Armageddon. So it was dumber than Armageddon, whatever he said.
There we go. But so the thing, like, then they have like, we have 15 pounds, like, on your giant rocket ship with like probably millions of pounds of fuel and all these people you picked up and their various weights, you can't find 15 pounds of stuff to throw out. You know, like, he's like, well, get rid of some stuff. They're like, we're already pretty stripped down. I'm like, okay, there's nothing, like, you're already that stripped. What if he would have put on 15 pounds by the time you got there? Like, he can't get on anymore.
So did you, in the back of your mind at any point, think that Corey was going to take out Adams or one of the other guys?
So, you know, I do my thing where I try to like make some guesses throughout the episode of what's going to happen as on my first time watching this. So about a little before 5 minutes in, when they make the first supply run, they say like, oh, we only have 15 minutes. I thought at that point he was going to try to delay them so that they somehow have to, because they're like, if we don't get out in these 15 minutes, we'll have to stay another 2 weeks. And he would love company for 2 weeks. So I thought he was going to try to delay him, and that somehow is going to end up with like just him and Adams, the guy who hates him, like left alone on this asteroid, two people who can't stand each other. I thought that would have been.
Yeah, that would have been kind of cool.
Yeah. And then just for the record, to finish up the predictions, the only other one I made was just a couple minutes later when Allenby says, I brought you something special. It's in a large crate. I'll get fired if they knew. And he told the guys, like, bring this large crate, and it's very fragile. And, okay, so we're a third of the way into the episode, so I can't toot my horn a ton, but I will say I predicted at that point they brought him a female robot companion, and he's going to fall in love with the robot and not want to leave without her.
Speaking of that, though, so if they're so tight that they can't fit an additional 15 pounds, how did Allenby sneak this female? I would think NASA or whoever is doing this would actually have like a cargo check. Also, this reminded me a little bit of Armageddon. Now that I mentioned Armageddon, did they teach policemen to space, or did they teach spacemen to police? Because apparently the guys that came and were dropping stuff off for him were cops. So,
right, they were carrying guns.
Or is Earth that advanced that cops are that's just basically a car and like a long road trip?
That's a really good question, because they definitely didn't seem like the brightest bulbs on the shelf, but they also didn't seem like, it seemed like maybe rocket ships at that point were just as simple as a car. I think that's a good suggestion you make, because they just sort of climb up the ladder and get in and like, oh, where are we going next? Oh, we got to go to this other asteroid or whatever. Like, and you think of what goes into like a space launch today, and like the weather has to be perfectly right, and it takes all these people on ground control and these trained astronauts. I got the sense that, like you said, maybe it's just like a car or something at this point. Any idiot can fly a spaceship.
And now that I'm saying this out loud, these are definitely police that are flying a spaceship, because Allenby, right, the second Corey's like, hey, no, we have to take Alicia, and he's like, she's just a robot. To prove it, he shoots her directly in the face to show Corey that she's a machine. It was like when the Terminator, instead of just being like, no, I'm a robot, here, like here's my, he cuts off his skin. He like rips off his hand skin. It was like, okay, Jesus fucking Christ.
By the way, that's from Terminator 2. If you haven't seen that, that's a fantastic movie, despite the unnecessary pulling off his arm. But it's a really cool visual effect.
You and your James Cameron love.
I do love some James Cameron. Although I'm
Terminator 2
about
is excellent.
These making 4 Avatar sequels. I thought the first one was fine. I saw it once and okay, I enjoyed my 3 hours in the theater or whatever it was. I have no desire to go see it again. And I don't look, people, nobody has ever made money betting against James Cameron. So I will put, whatever he does, he seems to have a good sense on what the market wants and what will be successful. But the idea that there's a market out there who's been clamoring for 4 Avatar sequels is a little insane. And I know we're way off track here. Other than those, Alicia is also an Avatar, right?
Oh, very good. So, good way to pull it back in.
Yeah. Okay. So I wrote the same thing. Like, Allenby shoots Alicia. That seems pretty excessive. Like, doesn't even try to convince him we need to leave her here, or we'll come back on another ship, or start slapping Corey and she's just a robot. He literally just pulls out his gun as his first. This is his first thought. Pull out gun, shoot in face. Done.
He's like, it was kind of like in Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is the greatest movie of all time. When Harrison Ford just shoots the sword wielding guy, he's like, I just don't have time, because Harrison apparently had dysentery or something at the time.
Yeah.
And he's basically like, we don't have time for this. We have to go. And so he just shoots her. But it seemed like there could have been an easier way to prove, she came in a box, dude. Come on. Because she's obviously not. To give
and what did he? I'm curious what he thought was going to happen. So Alicia is a gift from Allenby originally, put there so this guy would have somebody to talk to that he could treat as a companion to not lose his sanity out of loneliness. And then he gets back and Corey is doing exactly what he sort of expected and left the robot there for. He's like, what do you mean you're talking with her and treating her like a human? She's just a robot. Like,
Yeah.
this is the most predictable problem possible. Like, as soon as you like I said, as soon as, even before we knew it was a robot, I'm like, oh, it's going to be a robot in the crate and this is what's going to happen. Like, I got to say though, Allenby's pretty nice, like, for this convicted murderer, whether self-defense or not. And that was another whole weird thing, that they spent a disproportionate amount of time on like what his crime was and whether he actually did it or not, for something that had no bearing on the story. He just needed to be a criminal exiled here. That was the only thing that was relevant.
Yeah. It was the only thing that distracted me about it was like, what the hell could he have possibly done that was so awful?
Well, and he's like, it was self-defense, and Allenby's like, yeah, I know it was too. Like, so what did he do that was so awful to get him exiled here and was self-defense? Like, someone invaded his home, and so he like tied the guy up and cut off all his...
Tortured him?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're really, it's like Singapore has taken over the world and it's a zero tolerance society. Like, we don't care if it was self-defense. You kill somebody, you're off to an asteroid.
And sorry for our 2 Singapore listeners. So just to give, I kind of like to put some context around this stuff. So this asteroid is 9 million miles from Earth. So that sparks some, just the vastness of space. You know how much that fascinates me. Mm-hmm. So I did look up, do you have any guesses how far away like Neptune and Pluto are from Earth?
Oh, it's got to be more than that, right?
It is more than that. Do you have any idea of like the scale of more than that?
I don't, other than I'm like, okay, well, I know it takes light 8 minutes to reach Earth from the sun, traveling at the speed of light because it's light. And those far out planets are way further from the Earth than the sun is. So I mean, yes. I would guess you're into the like hundreds of millions of miles.
You are in, Neptune is 2.7 to 2.9 billion miles away from Earth.
All right.
And Pluto is 4.67. So think about that. Basically 4.67 billion miles away from Earth. So going from Earth to Neptune, not quite twice as much, but then you'd have to do that trip again to get to Pluto. So look how far away from Pluto Neptune is. It's crazy. I for whatever reason, I guess it's that sort of the fact that it is so astronomical, no pun intended, to try and wrap your mind around those distances. Like, you could fit all of the planets in between, I think I mentioned this in a previous episode, in between Earth and the moon. So like the vastness of space is just absolutely bananas. But I just wanted to put some perspective on that. So that's 9 million miles
away. It doesn't actually sound that far then.
No,
but I guess you got to be close if you're making 4 runs a year. Like, why don't they take a bigger ship, make bigger runs, and do it twice a year or once a year? This was just some poor planning on their part.
Did Allenby's relationship with Corey remind you okay, we're going to spoil the end of Breaking Bad, which is now several years. You've seen Breaking Bad, obviously, right? I
have seen Breaking Bad.
Okay, so the end of Breaking Bad.
Was there more than one episode? I watched the first one.
Okay, well, there's a lot that happens, and then so this is just the last episode. So just watch the first and the last before we're giving you a chance to pause this and go watch the last episode. You don't need to watch El Camino.
I think we should tell people, pause this, go watch the entire series of Breaking Bad, come back like 6 weeks later, and finish the episode. That's what you should do if you're listening right now.
If we've got someone that has not watched Breaking Bad yet, I would actually prefer if they just watch the first and the last episode and try and guess what happened in between.
And I would say if we have any listeners who haven't watched Breaking Bad yet, it would be a better use of your time to just pause this and never restart the podcast and just watch Breaking Bad.
Okay.
Anyway, so back to your point. Last episode.
It reminded me a lot of, so at the end of Breaking Bad, when Walter's essentially in exile up in Canada or where the hell he is, and he's got his supply runner, and Walter's like begging him to stay and play cards and just hang out with him because he's feeling so isolated. It was the same. I mean, it was the same story. Essentially, Walter White's a criminal that Walter's exile is relatively self-imposed because he doesn't want to get captured. And Corey just got caught. So it very much harkened back. See, I think I'm going to fall on the opposite side of the spectrum from you on this episode, Mark, because I thought this episode of the ones we've seen so far, and I know we'll get to it, was one of the most, I felt like you could drop this one in 2019 and I would not bat an eye. I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. This episode, I felt like this was a very relevant episode, but I'm sure we'll get to that. But
yeah, I don't want to jump ahead. I think foreshadowing, one thing that would definitely not work just dropped in 2019 were the gender dynamics in this episode.
Yes, very true. Good point.
Yeah, so I would actually say, like, I thought this was an episode that was chock full of interesting ideas. I can't believe I just said chock full.
I liked it.
But, like, it was like too much stuff, and they didn't really go anywhere they didn't have enough time to do much with any of it. Like the relationship between the person and I mean, I guess this stuff we'll get to in our contemporary relevance, but there's a lot of stuff that I think I agree with you holds up very well today and are really interesting ideas, but they were cramming so many ideas in, they didn't really have time to do much with any of them. I do want to shout back to our very first episode of the Twilight Zone and of this podcast, which was Where Is Everybody? Which was another take on this same idea of the sort of loneliness of being in a very different way in that case, because they were training astronauts, but the loneliness of space and what happens to the mind when you're left out there alone. The interesting thing there is basically that guy went insane after, what was it, 2 or 3 weeks?
It was like
isolation.
A couple hours.
No,
yeah, it was a couple weeks.
But like this guy got a 50-year sentence by himself. So apparently between episode 1 and 7, Rod Serling decided that people can actually handle a lot more loneliness than he had initially thought. But it's clearly a theme that is of big interest to him. We have 2 of the first 7 episodes dealing with that. And I also want to throw out something we've talked about in previous episodes, that a lot of them haven't been what the sort of cultural mindset of what the Twilight Zone is. Like, we think sci-fi, aliens, whatever, that sort of weird stuff, as like, you think of that as the Twilight Zone. And a lot of these episodes have not been that. They've been character studies about personal issues and things like that. This, I thought, was the first one that we've seen that's really a true sci-fi. It's a guy on this asteroid. We have rocket ships taking off and landing regularly. Robots that look like humans. And so this was not saying it's better or worse than any of the other ones, because there's some other ones we've seen that we liked quite a bit and some that we didn't. But I thought this was the first one that I think like felt like what people think of the Twilight Zone as.
When, just so you know too, when you say that in a previous episode someone was talking about it, it was me then. If it wasn't you talking about it, it was me.
Somebody on the podcast. It wasn't me.
Yeah, we had robots, or robots, as Alan B called Alicia.
Did you think of Futurama? Because that's always what Dr. Zoidberg says to Bender. He's like, okay, robot.
Yes. Yeah. So, Mark, I think a question that is probably on a lot of people's minds, speaking of gender relations, how soon after Alicia got dropped off on the planet do you think that Corey tried to have sex with it?
I mean, it has to have been at least like 20 to 30 minutes, because he first off was pretty upset with her, and then like basically attacks her, then sees she can cry, and that like changed his mind. He grabs her hand and they walk back inside, and I assume it was then.
Yeah, I assume so too. So I will say, get a serious point about their sort of dynamic, and I do agree with you. Bear in mind, they have 24 minutes or so to 22 to 24 minutes to make us feel all these things and go through what really you could probably explore in the course of a movie. But early on, when he's talking to Alicia, he's like, can you, or do you get thirsty? Do you get hungry? Like, do you feel pain? And I thought that was a neat foreshadowing to Alicia's ultimate fate. Mm-hmm. And one of the moments that turns him to falling for her is she cries. Like, they programmed her to cry, which reminds me of the, oh God, was it Futurama? But they're like, why was I programmed to feel pain? Was some robots getting tortured?
Or to throw back to Terminator 2, the end of that movie is, well, the plot throughout the movie is John Connor kind of teaching the Terminator like what it means to be human, And he asks once, like, why do humans cry? And he's trying to explain, like, it's not just pain. It can be, like, emotional. And then at the end, he's like, I understand now why you cry, but it's something I can never do.
I can never do.
Man, that end of that movie is so good.
Oh, Terminator 2 is an excellent movie. As much as I drag James Cameron, Terminator 2 was a defining movie of my childhood.
That was the first R-rated movie I saw in a movie theater.
Oh, wow. Can I really quickly go on a little bit of a tangent here?
Why not? That's what this whole podcast is.
This is why I don't watch trailers.
No, you can't quickly go on a tangent. You have to go on a long tangent. That's our rule.
I don't watch trailers as for something that I know. I've never watched a Star Wars trailer of any of these new ones because even when they're bad, I know I'm going to go see them. But the people that cut the trailer for Terminator 2 ruined that movie because, like, you weren't supposed to know that Arnold was the good guy until that. Oh, by the way, spoilers for Terminator 2, until that revelation that he's there to protect her. And they show it they give that whole thing away. You're supposed to think it's another scary Terminator 1, and they give the whole thing away in the trailer. Trailers, be better. Cutters.
So actually, the on the DVD for that, they kind of walk through the marketing campaign and the logic behind it, and it was kind of like a 3-step. Like the first one was just like awareness, like there's another Terminator movie. The second one is that the second phase was like, now there's 2 Terminators. There's Arnold and this other guy. And then the third phase was explicitly revealing that Arnold is going to be the good guy in this one.
Oh, well, why would they do that?
Do you want to know why? Okay, so you're going to...
Damn it, did I just open up a can of worms?
Well, no, we actually talk about this in my editing class because we do a project where we cut trailers. I am not advocating for this. I am with you. I wish they wouldn't reveal things, but there are research studies that have been done, and all the data shows that the more you reveal to somebody about the plot, including the ending in the trailer, the more likely they're going to go see the movie. So they're doing it because the data shows that's how you make a trailer that puts butts in seats.
Well, damn it, data.
I wish people were smarter than that, but we have all sorts of evidence that people are stupid. And this is maybe one other piece for that, but that is why those trailers do that. And it's actually where I think one of the best marketing campaigns ever for a movie, in my opinion, and I should mention I don't study film marketing, this is just of things as a consumer I have seen, was The Sixth Sense. Because what they did was they convinced you there was going to be a twist, and they cut the trailers and did all the marketing in such a way that you thought you knew what the twist was. So it was like they were giving away the ending or making you think that you knew how it was going to end, but then they had this second twist that nobody saw coming. And that was brilliant because they would have said there's a twist and not revealed the I see dead people. Everyone would have been trying to figure out what it was, but they knew how people watch trailers and understood, like, oh, we're going to do all this marketing about a twist and we'll put this line in the trailer like, I see dead people, and people think that's the twist and think that they know the secret and not look for something else.
And also they made people think that they had missed the first 5 Sense movies. Just one real quick point, and then I think we should take a break. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is this not the first episode that we've watched so far where we had a narrator that wasn't Serling? Because James Corey has a voiceover, and I guess it makes sense because he's the only one on this planet other than Alicia. But as he's thinking about Alicia, and there's a voiceover by the main character, James Corey, that is not one of Serling's voiceovers.
It is the first one we've seen, and I noted that as well because we get the voiceover twice, and in both times it's related to the first time they sort of explain it as he's writing in a journal, and we're kind of hearing his journaling as he's basically explaining his backstory and how lonely he is and blah, blah, blah. And then the second time it's about Alicia and how his perceptions of her have changed. Yeah, it felt weird for the Twilight Zone because you already have the Rod Serling narration. That felt kind of out of place. I think it was just a structural thing of there's nobody there for him to talk to. We need to get this information, and that was the way they could convey it.
They could have gotten the prostitute from Mr. Denton on Doomsday to come and just have him bounce ideas off of her, since that's the only purpose she served in that episode, right?
That would have been pretty interesting if his whole punishment is like isolation, and then like there's also just another person who happens to be there for him to talk to who's not being punished.
She's like, why?
And she's in an old west like barmaid gear for no.
It's like
reason.
no. She's like, but for you this is heaven, for me it's hell. Is that old story?
By the way,
Anyhow.
Speaking of him doing the voiceover, I wasn't a huge fan of the casting in this. Kind of across the board, but obviously particularly Corey is the main character, and this was what's the guy's name? James Harden? James Warden.
Yeah,
James Harden's the
You'd
basketball
recognize him from some other stuff.
Yeah, so
Jack Warden.
he's
Jack
I
Warden.
went and looked because I couldn't place him for a second, but I knew I had seen him in a bunch of things. He's one of the jurors in 12 Angry Men.
Yeah, the
He's,
angry one.
The angry one, right? He's Saul from While You Were Sleeping, if you're into the rom-coms, and he's Harry in All the President's Men, the classic sort of Watergate investigation piece.
Oh yeah.
And I think that I had seen all of those things. I think Harry from All the President's Men was first what I was recognizing him from.
Not from the Problem Child series.
Is he in the Problem Child series?
He is. He's Big Ben.
No, I didn't recognize him from that. I don't think I saw the Problem Child series.
Oh boy.
Anyhow, he has been in good stuff and has been good in it. I'm not sure he was the right choice for this. Because right from the get-go, when Rod Serling's still doing his voiceover and explaining like this man dying from loneliness, we see Corey sort of wandering around, and he doesn't really look like he's dying of loneliness or even particularly lonely. He just looks kind of like bored, but not particularly discontent or upset. He's just sort of like living like a hermit and kind of okay with it in terms of the performance.
Yeah, I agree. He didn't seem particularly stressed, which is kind of because he was one of the first actors that other than from Mr. Denton on Doomsday, I forget who that was. He's one of the first actors that I recognized before.
Is it Martin Landau?
Yeah, Landau. That I'm like, I know I've seen this guy and stuff before. But yeah, it wasn't the greatest job, although that's also got to be a tough. I mean, think about like what acting was at this time. Like he's probably one of the few, like now actors have to act by themselves against CGI screens all the time. And like, I mean, to be acting 100% essentially on your own for the first part of it, I don't know. And the Twilight Zone in general seems to have been doing some stuff that would be a stretch for, I think, for any actor at this day and age. So I'm going to give him a little bit of a pass on that. Also, because I really like this episode.
Fair enough. I did like when he sees the ship landing and his like excitement at other people showing up. Like that I thought was good. But kind of just the rest of the way, I don't know. I was not a huge fan of the performance in this.
Okay, should we, on that super positive note, should we take a quick break?
Sure.
All right. Okay, we're back, and I think we had a couple more thoughts about this episode before we get into our sweat scale.
Yeah, the last one I wanted to bring up, which is minor, but just I thought was another interesting way they could go. You remember I said that about 5 minutes in, I thought that the plot was going to be him trying to delay
Right.
the arrival ships. They had to stay for 2 weeks. And just time-wise, there were about 20 minutes left in the episode, and I actually had the thought that would have been an interesting thing for them to do is actually play the rest of the episode out in real time. Like, we just see, like, 20 minutes of this guy's life. But it's, like, 20 really important minutes. If he can get them to stay for 5 minutes extra, then they have to stay for 2 weeks, and he has companions. And if he doesn't, then he's left alone for three or four more months. And that was just as a filmmaking thing, something. I'm not sure how much real-time stuff there was going on at that time, but I thought would have been an interesting way to take this episode.
Well, and had he actually needed to do that, what he absolutely should have done is gotten, what's his name from One for the Angels to delay him and give a pitch to
why is this
Blue
pitch man
Bookman.
just wandering across this asteroid? I don't know. Let's see what he has to pitch.
That's why his pitching went so poorly, because he was on an asteroid 9 million miles from Earth.
Well, I gotta say too, like they don't schedule these well, unless again to your point that this is just like routine, like flying a rocket ship is like, you know, driving a car, or, you know, like operating a microwave or something like that. Just everybody can do super simply. The fact that they land there and like, we only have 15 minutes and we just spent 2 minutes like walking to your place, like wait, and they have to make like 2 trips back to the spaceship just to move the cargo. Like I worked a summer job one time where most of it was unloading things out of semis, and I would not allocate just 15 minutes just to get stuff unloaded somewhere and carried like a quarter mile. That seemed just like some poor planning, again, like this sort of arbitrary 15 minutes that they just put in to have some sort of a ticking clock deadline.
For sure. One thing I did want to say before we kind of close out our discussion of the episode is this: one of the series that we'd considered in doing, and I'm sure we're still considering, is part of Deja Reviewed, is the reboot of Battlestar Galactica.
I actually want to do that as our next one. I think that would be a really interesting one.
Yeah, well, and I also love that series. But this episode very much reminded me of the reboot of Battlestar, because one of the things that they explore is what the heck is the difference between us and machines? Like, is it the materials that we're made of? And if it's just the materials that we're made of, what if you could build a, you know, quote unquote human out of that same set of materials? Does that make them human? And I think that for 1959, I feel like that was a very, other than of course their treatment of the one woman in this episode, that was a very progressive, I think, thought, or a very, very deep thought for this, like you said, sci-fi series. And, you know, it was, I remember, Westworld is another one that's taking a deep dive into that. What the heck is a human? And I know that Revelation, again, let's not spoil Westworld, but there's revelations in the series Westworld. That is
still airing. We probably shouldn't be spoiling things for stuff that's still on. Anything.
But there's revelations in the series Westworld about these very thoughts. Like, why are we not considering these things that ostensibly have, or at least act like they have feelings or look like they have feelings? Why are we not treating them as human? And then, so I guess going back to Battlestar, it's like, well, if these robots were able to create robots that are like thinking, feeling, reasoning, doing all the same things that humans are doing, then why are we human and they're not? So it was very, I guess maybe this could also fall into the modern applicability section, but I was kind of thinking of it more along the lines of Battlestar Galactica and what a deep dive they took into like this idea of humanity.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that that is a important distinction, is this idea of robots sort of having humanity as opposed to just being, you know, automatons or servants. You know, to me, the sort of definitive robot of this era, when this original Twilight Zone was coming out, would have been Gort from The Day the Earth Stood Still, who is basically, you know, just a machine who kind of does what his master has programmed him to do, and there's no sense of personality or stuff. I'm trying to think back to, I am not an expert on the history of robots in movies and television, among the many things I'm not an expert on. But I'm thinking back to Fritz Lang's Metropolis back in the 1920s, and the robot in there, which does appear human and basically takes a human's place. So that idea is not new. Obviously, that's a sort of, you know, pretty seminal movie, and I don't know how many times it's sort of revisited from there. But I think in this era, you know, 1950s, we're in the sort of early computer era, and you see some other sci-fi dealing with robots and machines sort of thing. This probably, I'm not 100% sure, but this probably was somewhat progressive in dealing with the idea of the robot not just as a robot, but as something that could be human and have its own emotions and feelings and stuff like that. Although then, like many of the ideas raised in this episode, they just sort of completely sidestep that, shoot her in the face like, nope, she was just a robot, and move on.
Well, yeah. But that's why I find this so, and I mean, I think that was the argument. And again, we'll stick with Battlestar Galactica. That was the argument that, the toasters, why General or Colonel Ty would just call them toasters to dehumanize these things.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I guess one of the things when I was pitching this idea to you, Mark, one of the things that I found most fascinating about the Twilight Zone, I feel like every time I read a Philip K. Dick story, I'm like, oh, this reminds me of such and such and such, even outside the ones that were made of his, that were books that like were made into movies of his. Mm-hmm. There's so much that he influenced. And I feel like these Twilight Zone episodes that we're seeing, I can't specifically point to Vince Gilligan and say, hey, when you were writing that scene with Walter and the guy that's bringing him supplies, were you thinking back of this episode? But man, oh man, like there are specific references and specific things that are very, very modern, I think, in the Twilight Zone, or at least are being looked back by modern filmmakers and TV directors that are super interesting in this day and age, which is one of the reasons I wanted to do this.
Yeah, when we get to our final episode of this season and kind of look back at the whole Twilight Zone series and ask our ultimately core question of this podcast of why reboot this, I mean, I think it's indisputable that the Twilight Zone has had a ton of influence on other things. And you mentioned all the Simpsons episodes that have parodied or stolen from it. How many other movies and television shows have borrowed things from it? And that might be another one. I think the interesting thing there is the idea of sort of the humanoid robot, or could the robot be human, is certainly not unique to the Twilight Zone. It's certainly not the first time that had come up. But in an era where, computers and robotics and things were becoming more commonplace and more of a reality, as opposed to, in Metropolis, the idea of a robot that looks human is complete fantasy. Like that they're nowhere near the technology for that actually existing. And as these things get closer to reality, they raise some, more different questions. And I think that's maybe where the Twilight Zone kind of forces us to think about things that are actual questions we should be thinking about.
Yeah.
I feel like that was one of those things that was actually pretty dumb, but sounded profound if I said it the right way.
No, it's good. I liked it. I'm just gonna give you guys, before we move into our sweat level, I'm gonna read the closing narrations of these just to kind of close out our episode discussion. So the closing narration from Serling was, on a microscopic piece of sand that floats through space is a fragment of a man's life. Left to rust is the place he lived. This is badly written. Left to rust is the place he lived in and the machines he used. Without use, they will disintegrate from the wind and the sand and the years that act upon them. All of Mr. Corey's machines, including the one made in his image, kept alive by love, but now obsolete in the Twilight Zone.
I felt that was like a little cheesy, even by the Rod Serling standards, which I do love his voiceovers, as we talk about, and I think I fawn on every episode. But the sort of end there, the one made in his image, kept alive by love, but now absolute. I'm like, well, she was going to be alive regardless, and his love didn't really keep her alive. Like, I don't know. I felt like it was a stretch.
And one might argue that she was killed because of love, because like it was him wanting to get her on that ship that made Allenby shoot her in the face.
She was well trained, I'll say, that they when the supply ship comes in, she just goes and sits in her little like pile of rocks there, so that the Adams and the other guy don't know that he has a robot with her.
Right.
I thought for one brief moment when he says, "What about Alicia?" and the Adams and the other guy who didn't know are like, "What the heck's he talking about?" I thought for a moment, like, man, wouldn't this be bizarre if that whole thing was a figment of his imagination? Like, it was just like an empty crate and he imagined there had been like a companion in it.
Yeah, although, as an improviser, I really don't like the whole, it was all a dream. It was all in your imagination. It was all, because like it and granted, it's different for improv because we're creating something together, and I feel like we should sort of honor that shared universe.
Right.
But like when you've written it, I guess it's less cheap. But I feel like it's still a little bit of a cop out for a screenwriter to be like, and then it never really happened. And it's like, well, then why did you just waste my time for however many seasons or however many episodes?
I normally agree with that, and I don't necessarily know that would be more interesting than this. The way this ends raises a whole slew of different questions, but I'm actually not sure it would have been any worse than this because they kind of wrote themselves into a corner where they didn't have a productive way to end it.
Yeah.
So, anyhow, we'll talk about that with the modern relevance.
Very good. So on to the sweat. Our sweat level. Remember, we're ranking this from 1 to 10, and I think you even did half numbers in there. So
yeah, this was of all the weird things to want to talk about. I mentioned to you, like, I'm actually curious to talk about the sweat level on this because it was weird. Like, Corey's face was kind of usually a little bit sweaty, not like dripping, but glistening. Sweatening. But nobody else's was. And then he also like always had this like one line of sweat running down the back of his shirt and like the center of his pants, almost like he like wet his pants, but like, and somehow it like went up into his shirt. But
Yeah.
but like nowhere else on him, for most of the episode. There's one other scene where he has kind of like sweaty armpits, but I'm like, who like just sweats in one tiny little line down right vertically down the middle of your back? I thought it was really weird.
I'm super bothered. I couldn't get over the fact, as I was thinking about the sweatiness, the fact that he's on an asteroid 9 million miles away from Earth. So I assume he wasn't close. Maybe it was actually.
He could have been closer to the sun.
That's actually a good point. So maybe I shouldn't have been. I guess I was always just assuming the other. I think if you got 9 million miles closer to the sun, well, I don't know how far away the sun is. I should have looked that up.
Well,
anyhow,
I was going to say, as you described earlier, like 9 million miles in the context of space is actually not that much.
Not that big. So maybe, yeah, I guess he could have been closer to the sun. So maybe, you know what? I'm going to take that away. I'm going to let you rank the sweat.
This
is
says
unprecedented.
According to my Google search that I have done no research on other than just typing it in, the sun is about 93 million miles away from Earth. So you'd be within like 10% of the distance of Earth, whether he was 9 million further out or closer.
Okay. So I take it back. So, okay. Yeah, I'm going to have to let you, now my mind has been thrown asunder. So I'm going to do something unprecedented and let you 100% rank the sweat on this one.
Wow, I feel like that's a lot of pressure. This is the key thing people tune in for. I guess I'm gonna put it at like a 5 because he was the only one who was sweaty, but he was like bizarrely face sweaty all the time, and then the one random like stripe of sweat down his back that I found very distracting.
Okay. So we're giving it a 5 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what the scale exactly means, but to me, 5 implies this was not normal sweating. Maybe instead of a numerical scale, it should be like was it normal sweating? Was it weird sweating? Or was it just tons of sweat? I don't know.
Maybe we should also say what kind of sweating, like nervous sweating versus like exertion sweating.
His was
You know what? We
vertical
put way
sweating.
too much thought into the sweat thing. So I think a 5 is reasonable.
Okay, let's move on.
So yeah, moving on to modern applicability. Do you want to get us started or do you want to defer?
Well, unlike Dak Prescott, I know how to make a choice on that, and I will choose to get us started. That was a little football joke from 2 weeks ago.
Oh boy. Well, depending on when this episode comes out.
2 weeks ago from when we're recording it. So when it comes out, that might be 3 weeks or 2 months. Who knows? I guess the place I'd like to start in terms of the modern applicability, which you started getting at the end of our last segment, was this idea of the robot as human and as companion. This is such an interesting idea and certainly something with actually far more contemporary relevance than there probably was direct relevance in 1959. Serling was kind of looking ahead to what could happen. And now we're in an age where these actually can happen. You know, you can have your AI assistant virtually, your Alexa or Siri or Google or whatever. There are actual like functioning sex robots and stuff that are, literally designed to sort of be companions for these, for people who want that sort of companionship.
For people that really like the Joker.
But incels, there you go. It's so that's something that's a lot more relevant today than it would have been at the time, where this would have just been a fantasy, like a robot that actually looks more human. And obviously we're not there yet to have replicants who can really pass as human, but we're in this zone where that future is at least perceivable in sight. What struck me was that's such an interesting idea, and that was one of the, this is kind of a backhanded compliment or backhanded criticism, not sure which. One of the things that bugged me about this episode was it raised so many really interesting ideas that you could do so much with, but then didn't do much with them or follow through on it. And you're right earlier when you mentioned that part of it is the time constraints, and they have 20 minutes for things that could be, features. And I think of something like Her or Lars and the Real Girl, like feature movies that have been pretty interesting about this idea of people forming companions with inanimate or robotic or electronic objects, and forming romantic relationships with those. So it's not fair to fault it for not going that deep into that, but it really didn't do much with it. Corey's kind of initially very upset about it. He says, I don't need a machine. Why'd they build you to look like a machine? Why'd they turn you into a lie? Like, he would apparently prefer a robot that just looked like a robot. And then
with a sex hole. And then immediately, sees her cry after he physically hurts her, and then grabs her hand, and now they're friends, buddies, and he's in love with her, and sort of skips over the whole, like, the entire question of could you be in love with a machine, or what does it mean to fall in love with a machine, is kind of just skipped over, and he just immediately makes this change. And I don't know. I felt like there was so much there that could have been something, but they spent the first 15 minutes of the episode laying out all this exposition about how he was a prisoner on this asteroid and blah, 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 and didn't have enough time left to deal with the more interesting topic. So I'm going to defend them a little bit on this, because I didn't feel like there was a ton of like wasted time in this episode, but also this is some of the stuff they're doing. Like Mark, you and I are very world knowledgeable, but like you and I already have the
good words too.
But you and I already have like space travel. Oh yeah, blah, blah, blah. This is a society that had not, Serling's presenting this idea to an America that had not yet landed on the moon for another decade. So like, he almost has to be like, okay, this is how these things work. There's these prison asteroids that people are now being put on for whatever reason, and it takes all this time for them to even deliver supplies out there. Like, I mean, he kind of had to do a lot of exposition, I think, in these stories, because like, as kind of crazy as some of these ideas are in 2019, 60 years ago, this was complete batshit crazy. Because, like, think about it. We're watching this in the context of watch. I can even do this. Hey, Google. See, I can literally just say that, and my Google is probably now going to tell me she doesn't understand what I'm saying. But like, I mean, half the rooms in our house have smart devices in there that we talk to and ask questions of, they just respond to us. Like, that's being able to look something up on the internet is beyond the grasp of people that are watching this. So I think, like, but I think
you're making my point for me though. Because I don't disagree with any of that, but that's kind of my point, is these things need more explanation and more dealing with, and instead they're throwing all this into one like, you could have done a whole episode about what would it be like, what would it mean about our judicial system to isolate, instead of throwing someone in a cell, to throw them out on an asteroid as their punishment. So I'm not disagreeing. I'm not saying that opening exposition was wasted, but I'm saying that was for a different that was a different thing. And then just raising in the last 10 minutes, this idea of like, hey, you could fall in love with a robot, and not having enough time to deal with that, I thought was a missed opportunity. If I was the writer, I would have been like, you know, we're going to do 160
series.
episodes of Twilight Zone. We need to, we need as many ideas as we can get. If I have 2 good ideas, I'm not cramming them both into one episode.
Yeah, very true. I'm glad you brought up the idea of Punisher. So those are the 2 things that I actually came up with too. Is so Boston Dynamics is getting closer and closer to just replacing us all, and considering our AI systems are getting smarter and smarter, like the question, like I mentioned before, the question of what makes us special or makes us human is getting more and more relevant. And the story that he's trying to tell, I think, and I actually agree with you, Mark. Like, it was the story about Alicia, was the story about the question of punishment, because like, is that cruel and unusual? Is that worse than corporal punishment? Like, it was, I agree. I think there were I took it like there were a lot of cool thought exercises in here that I totally agree that they didn't have time to explore all of them, but I was super excited that all this stuff was getting brought up in 1959.
So we might actually not be as far apart as it initially seemed, because I think we're both kind of responding to, there's some really interesting ideas in here and interesting stuff to talk about that is still very relevant, and you're basically appreciating the fact that these thought-provoking questions were being raised, and I'm kind of calling the episode to task a little bit for raising things that it then didn't take the time to deal with.
Yeah, I honestly think that this was the most 2019 episode that I feel like I've seen so far.
Except for, let's bring it to the gender politics of this.
Yeah, okay,
dear
yes.
Lord.
I'm not expecting them to ever, by the end of the Twilight Zone getting wrapped, to ever, because I wanted to wrap in the mid 60s. I'm guessing that they are never going to figure that out, but yeah, for sure.
Well, but I mean, I do think there's an interesting question raised here too. As you mentioned, in a lot of ways, the ideas the show brings up are fairly progressive in a couple of senses. One, in terms of just like looking ahead into the future, and seeing things that will continue to be relevant, making us think about some of those. But also sometimes in in what we would in contemporary society consider more progressive or liberal or inclusive ideas. I mean, the idea that you could think of a robot as like a human, and that they could have emotions and be their own sort of entity, is in itself a pretty progressive idea. But then, okay, the way it just ends is they shoot her in the face. There's no repercussions for anybody. And they're like, oh yeah, she was just a robot. It's fine. But when she very first comes out, that he reads all these instructions about, she has the same emotions and feelings and everything as a human. She's basically a normal human woman, but she's basically built to be a male fantasy. She comes out and like, I'm basically, very first thing she does after he kind of like refuses to talk to her, and she just keeps repeating, my name's Alicia, what's your name? He goes in and she like comes in like, let me get you a drink, you look thirsty.
Right, exactly.
I mean, they basically built a slave.
Right. Oh, totally. And also, I'm sure there was not an option for him to have a male robot companion on that. I'm sure they didn't even ask him if he would prefer a male robot companion on his lonely 9 million miles from Earth asteroid. But that's a good point.
Well, so I mean, I think in terms of the like, were they ready for him to have a romantic relationship with a male looking robot? No. But they could, if the idea was just that he needs human companionship, and going back to the first episode where, the where is everybody, the sort of central conceit of that was people need human connection. They need people to talk to. They can't live on their own forever. If he had had a male companion, that would have been someone for him to talk to interact with, to play chess with. It would just remove any romantic or sexual ideas. So it's not accidental that they make it's not a male, it's a woman, because they want it to be like, this is the servant of the man, and that's the gender politics they're raising there. And I mean, the way that he treats her for, so it is a robot, so I guess it depends how much we want to personify the robot. But like the very first thing he does is kind of yell at her, and then the next thing he does is literally abuse her. She's like, oh, you hurt my arm. He's like, oh, you can't really feel pain, and like goes and hurts her other arm, throws her on the ground. Yeah. Then she's like crying, and like, if you would have just tuned in at that shot and had no idea what the background is, and then he like sees her crying and like reaches up and grabs her hand and takes her up, you'd be like, oh, this is like somebody in an abusive relationship who, as soon as the man apologizes, like stays with him. I don't know. I thought that aspect of this episode did not hold up at all, in the sense that it was so unacceptable in contemporary terms that it was like distracting from the plot of the story.
So, and then you honestly get into the issues of, okay, well, if they're saying it's a machine and you're supposed to be treating it as a machine, then why are you making this? Why are you confusing? Like, maybe it should have just been an exoskeleton with a sex hole, if like that could just fetch you drinks, and like, which is essentially what he kind of treated her as. And
can you imagine sorry, you said exoskeleton, and I'm just thinking of the Terminator exoskeletons when they get the skin ripped off them. I guess technically they're endoskeletons because they're under, but whatever.
They are endoskeletons.
Like, could you imagine one of those with a sex hole? That would be like the scariest thing you could ever imagine. It's like, come make love to me. It's like, oh my God, those faces like haunt you in your dreams.
Well, and I'm going to quibble a little bit on those being endo versus exoskeletons, because the old Terminators that were just those chrome things, those were their exoskeletons, I think. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think of exoskeleton
underneath
as like it's on the exterior and there's something inside it.
Inside.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
They call them exoskeletons in the movie, so we'll go with that.
Well, now you're going to make me feel bad about liking this episode, though, because I was able to ignore all of those horrible implications.
Well, I mean, I think you're a big fan, as we go through this, of sort of putting these in the context of the 1950s when they're made, and we talked about this with what was the episode where the guy goes back to his childhood home? Walking Distance. And so I don't want to excuse these things, but I think it's worth noting the time that they're being made. But where the idea is about how do humans interact with machines and robotics, like that's a really thoughtful idea that you can and people have done a lot with more recently. I mean, even the Terminator series deals with that same thing.
Yes, and that was the interesting part to me. And just to also be clear, just because you and I are trying to put it in the context of when it was made, we're not excusing the treatment of women in 1959, which was most largely inexcusable.
Listeners, your takeaway is Mike Brott supported the treatment of the fembot in this movie.
So, but yeah, I I don't want to let this other issue that you raised go unanswered, because I think I just asked the question and I didn't give it sort of an answer, because like the other big question is the question that I think is very relevant in 2019 is the question of punishment. Mm-hmm. And I threw out, is this cruel and unusual? Is this worse than corporal punishment? And then I kind of just let those questions die. No pun intended. But like I think that is a question to ask us, because like I think I was reading some articles about like putting, from the classic Cool Hand Luke is throwing him in the box, like that is considered cruel. I don't think that's even allowed anywhere anymore, as like isolating prisoners to that extent, unless there's like a serious like danger.
Right. And there's like a limit to how long you could be in solitary confinement and stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah. Because that Serling was really hitting on, like you said, where is everyone? The first episode that we watched, this episode, these themes of isolation in Twilight Zone keep coming up, and this human companionship that everyone strives toward to deprive, like literally drives people insane in solitary confinement. So, and like, I'm sorry, you can take away someone's physical freedom. I think that's a much less cruel means of punishment. Like, hey, you're not allowed to hang out in society for a little while because of what you've done, but to like break them mentally, which is what solitary confinement, I don't know if that's what the intent is for solitary confinement or if that's just the effect of it, but it mentally breaks people that are in there for too long. I mean, that's what Cool Hand Luke was about, or One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Mm-hmm. Like and so I do think that the idea of putting someone on essentially their own planet by themselves is batshit insane as far as cruel and unusual. I don't care what he did. I don't care if he was a torturer or he was a mass murderer. Like this, I would consider putting Ryan Johnson on this asteroid by himself, but anyone else on the planet. I do think that this is cruel and unusual.
You really have a
frankly,
deep-seated hatred for Ryan Johnson that seems
sure as hell
beyond rational cause.
Well, I don't know about beyond rational cause, but anyhow, but I do want to answer that question. I do think that this is just about one of the worst things that you can do to a human being. And I'm a person that could I work from home. I could sit in isolation for days at a time and not bat an eye at it. But if I didn't have my dogs, I didn't have the ability to go out, call someone, text someone, even those days that I'm in quote unquote isolation, I'm still connected to people. I'm still sending emails. I'm still texting people. Like I'm still in communication with people. And that talk about making a minute stretch into an eternity is doing something like this to someone.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. I think that's to me probably the most interesting thing this episode raises, and they very explicitly do it. In some of the conversations between Corey and what's the guy Atwell and Allenby.
Allenby, yeah.
Where they're talking about what had happened to him, and again, I think there was some superfluous stuff about like, does it matter if it was self-defense or whether he was innocent or not? Like, this is a pretty ridiculous punishment regardless. And, Allenby says, that there's a lot of people on Earth think it's unnecessarily cruel and they're looking at changing the laws. And that's actually what happens in the end is the society sort of sees the error of its ways and brings these people back. And I think it says he got pardoned. It's unclear if everyone got pardoned or if maybe they're going to be brought back and put in like a normal jail. But like, no, we're not going to isolate people on these asteroids. And I agree. I think that's a really kind of profound question to ask is like, if somebody has done something wrong, even if they had done, some sort of unimaginable horrors, what as a society do we think is reasonable for them to do or pay in restitution for that? And this seems pretty extreme, and the episode very explicitly raises that. And again, that's something I would have liked them to really focus the episode in a little bit more on and save the, human robot romance for another episode, just because I felt like you kind of had two halves that were focusing in on different things. The interesting thing, of course, is setting aside any of the other issues with the robot-human relationship that we've already talked about, just the idea of if that had worked as a companion, as Allenby had intended, basically they're negating his entire punishment. Like, yeah, no, I have somebody here. I'm good. We'll just hang out. And like, well, so now we're sending this guy off 9 million miles, making these supply runs to not really punish him. It was very weird. But I would, the contemporary relevance to this, I would bring up that still occasionally does, I shouldn't say occasionally, I think it's still part of our politics, but I think doesn't get as much discussion as it should, is that, we're one of the few countries that still has the death penalty. Yeah. And, that's, at least in this case, they realized the error of their ways and were able to bring him back. That's the sort of final punishment. Like, if we do that, doesn't matter if we made a mistake, we can't undo it. And that's a conversation I think, like, as a society is still worth having and is still ongoing. I mean, I think every year there's some cases at the Supreme Court about what are the limits of that and what makes that cruel and unusual or not. And so wherever you fall on their verdicts or the cases on what your beliefs are, it's definitely something society, American society, is still trying to deal with in a place where we are less progressive than many others.
And you live in Texas. And if you guys want a little bit more, a little expounding of that, like, isolation punishment, if you've watched, I'm not going to spoil anything, but watch the episode of Black Mirror with John Hamm in it, because it's not quite this, but it's very, very thematically similar to this. I don't remember the name of the episode. It's like a Christmas episode with not really Christmas episode, but it's the John Hamm Black Mirror episode is worth definitely worth your time. It's one of the best episodes of a very excellent show. So,
and you mentioned I'm in Texas here, and I won't tell the whole story again, but I was being interviewed for a podcast my school is doing where they're just interviewing different faculty members, kind of talking about their history here, and told a story about when I came to SMU to interview for the job, and one of the first things someone said to me is like, well, probably what you know about SMU is the death penalty, and I'm like, oh my God, you guys have the death penalty at your school? And they were talking about the football, but I don't follow college football. I had never heard anything about this. And that's like the first thing they brought up to me. And I'm like, oh my, what kind of crazy place did I walk into?
Oh, that's good. Okay. Any other thoughts on minor applicability, Mark, or should we rate this bad boy?
No, I think this is definitely, you said this is one that holds up very well in terms of at least a lot of the themes being dealt with, and I would definitely say it's one where there's a lot of big picture issues that we're still discussing today, and that I don't know that we really have any more answers than we did back in 1959.
Yeah, good point. So moving on to rating, I'm gonna disregard. That sounds even worse to say. Bearing in mind that we. Obviously, the gender issues are a whole can of worms that I don't even want to open up. But this episode, I thought that there was so much interesting stuff that was going on in this episode aside from that, and so much stuff that I saw in current iterations, current media. I talked about Breaking Bad. I talked about Battlestar Galactica, the Terminator. There was a lot of none of that stuff is that modern even anymore, but there was a lot of very modern stuff, I thought, in this episode. It was nice, like you mentioned, that we were kind of back to a very sci-fi-y version of a Twilight Zone episode. So I really, really like this episode. So I am going to give this a 5 out of 5.
Well, I will not. I want to say, I'll kind of do the same thing you did in terms of I think the gender dynamics of this are not affecting my rating, but I think we're symptomatic of the big issue with this episode for me, which is it was raising things that then it didn't have the time or interest in following through on. And just whether it had been a man or a woman, the fact that they made this robot basically as a slave to him, like, hey, but it's just like a human, except it's a human that just does everything you want it to do. There's so much to talk about with that they just bluntly ignore. And he's like, I love Alicia. I'm like, well, of course you do. She's just like, I would love anybody who just does everything that I want them to do exactly how they want it. Like, I don't know if that's love, but certainly I would not want to lose that person. So I'm going to give this like a 2.5 or a 3. I'll give it a 3 for the big ideas and the issues with punishment and imprisonment and the idea of human robot relationships. But I thought those weren't handled that well, and I also thought this was just one of the less well made episodes that we saw. The performances were not good. The dialogue was flat.
The set was boring.
The set was just a house in the middle of nowhere. Well, then they did have a nice cheesy little rocket ship set where the guy is climbing up the ladder. And like the rocket was like clearly big enough to hold like 2 people, and yet they've picked up all these other inmates on the way back. I don't know. I was not a big fan of this episode, and I was often, the big ideas were provocative, but I was often bored by the episode itself. So I'm gonna go 2.5. Actually, I'm gonna go down.
So something you said in there that is interesting, and actually that not to spoil your upcoming episodes, but the Twilight Zone is actually going to explore. I don't know that you would want to be with someone that didn't challenge you or did not you necessarily personally. I know I personally would not want to be with someone that didn't challenge me. It was just always, everything was quote unquote perfect. And I know you're not saying this in any sort of negative way, but it's funny. We're going to get to an episode at some point that kind of explores not exactly that, but kind of that idea where everything's going right for you. And like, is that good? Always.
Well, we have that a little bit with
the dead guy.
Yeah,
Or
the guy who
deal.
was invincible and then like couldn't get through.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
What
I
was
guess
it?
to be clear, like my point isn't that that's like what I would want in like a romantic relationship, but certainly like if I had, if I had a robot that was doing a lot of the grunt work and stuff for me that I don't have to do, I would not want to lose that robot. I don't necessarily want to be in a romantic relationship with it, but that like seems like something useful.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Escape clause is the one I was
Escape
thinking
clause. There you go. The one about Santa Claus, right?
of. Yeah. The Santa escape clause where Tim Allen has to be the devil.
I think it should be a horror movie called Escape Clause with no E on the end of clause, and it's like a demonic Santa Claus that's like people are trying to thwart as the monster.
Like Krampus.
Or like the Santa Claus in Futurama.
Oh yeah. John Goodman. Okay, now we're overtime.
We're always
So-
overtime.
Well, this wasn't so bad.
Welcome
any
to
final-
our 85th consecutive episode of Going Overtime.
Any final thoughts, Mark, before we call this one a wrap?
No, I'm glad we watched this one. It was interesting to finally see a true sci-fi sort of Twilight Zone. So we'll see if we get more of that as we go on, or if that really is a sort of misconception of that being what the Twilight Zone is.
Okay, and then real quick, just so you can guess for next week. Next week, we're going to be watching episode 8, which is titled Time Enough at Last. So do you have any guesses on what that's going to be about, Mark? Time Enough
Okay,
at
so
Last?
I will either be completely wrong or cheating here. I'm not sure which, but well, there's an episode I remember seeing long ago when I was not watching the Twilight Zone regularly, but like I've seen a couple, and it's also one that then is referenced by Futurama and by Simpsons where they parodied it, and it's the one where the guy sort of finds himself alone in the world, and finally has time to like read all the books he's wanted to read and do the things he wanted to do, and then goes to the library and his glasses break or something like that. So this might actually be that episode, but I'm going to guess that it's something about somebody finds himself alone and has time to do all the things they've wanted to do but haven't been able to, and then through some sort of ironic event actually cannot do those things they wanted to do.
I feel like you and I have talked about that specific like idea of wanting to have a bunch of time to review all the media. So this, yeah, if your guess is accurate.
That might just be me like projecting like, oh, I particularly we're in this golden age of television in particular. I mean, there's obviously good movies that come out. There are good podcasts that come out. Not this one, but others. And like so much media to consume, and you just don't have the time. And I mean, like this season, there's multiple new series or series that are new to me that I just sort of found out about this season that may have been running for a little while that I would love to watch, and most of them I am never going to have time to.
So speaking of that,
so I fantasize about this sort of idea of having time to just sit and like, okay, I'm going to go watch The Mandalorian, which I would like to watch and have not even started.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, I hear it's so good, and I'm a Star Wars fan, so I imagine I would enjoy it. And just I'm like, when am I going to have the time to do that? I don't know.
Make time. So speaking of Mark saying that, we do know that you guys do have a bunch of choices out there. So thank you for listening to this podcast. This is Deja Reviewed. Next time's episode, I would just say next week, but who knows? Next week's episode.
You've been posting them pretty much weekly.
Pretty much. Sorry, I missed Christmas. Next week's episode is episode 8 of season 1 of The Twilight Zone. Like I just mentioned, Time Enough at Last. They are available on US Netflix if you want to watch along with us. Feel free to leave us a rating and a comment wherever you're listening to us. And actually, if you guys go to anchor.fm, go to our podcast there, you can actually leave us a voicemail. If you guys want to, I'm sure we would be very happy to play voicemails or at least respond to voicemails. If you guys are at all interested to give us your thoughts about any of these past episodes or any of these episodes that are coming up. We'd love to hear from you guys.
I didn't know people could do that, and I would love to. That'd be a cool way to start each episode. Is like, hey, here's comments from last episode.
Yeah. I think that would be great. So you can do that there, or you can always tweet at us. Go to DejaReview.com. All of our social media and stuff is there. And we sincerely hope you give us more time and tune in again next week.
Deja Review.